My brother didn't leave his room for 3 days. My parents wouldn't let me check on him. On the third night Jacob didn't come out of his room, I got the courage to bring it up to Mom. "Please don't sleep for this long," I said. She was cooking a casserole, the 6th one this week. We were running out of fridge space for the leftovers, but she kept making more. I would watch her from the corner of the kitchen, her posture curved and her newly grayed hair hanging over the food. I walked over and tugged at her sleeve, but she didn't respond. She was slathering butter on the top crust. "Mom," I said, "did you hear me?" "He needs his strength," she said. "We can't be bothering him." Before I could say anything, Dad walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, but he was smiling. He had 3 cans of Coke in his hands.
"I'm starving," he said. "I still have the taste of that horrible cafeteria food in my mouth."
"You would think hospitals had good food for how much money they make," Mom said.
"I know, right?" Dad said.
He placed the Cokes on the counter. Mom didn't want us to go near Jacob's room, but I was getting worried. I peered out from the kitchen. His room hung at the end of the hallway like an abandoned lighthouse, the only sign of life being the NY Yankees poster taped to his door. Near the ground, there was a small sliver of space to see if he had turned on his lights. It was still dark as it had been for the last 3 days. I turned back to Mom. "Shouldn't we check on him?" I asked.
"I don't know why places like Wendy's or Burger King don't put up little shops in hospital," Dad went on. "I mean, you have hundreds of people who are stuck there for days on end. That's consistent business."
"It's all politics," Mom said. "They sign these big contracts that are impossible to break."
Right, that makes sense, right.
Dad was standing next to Mom now, his face inches from the casserole. He took a long sniff.
"Ah," he said, "smells great."
"Do you want some of the leftovers while this finishes in the oven?" she asked. "I think we still have some from yesterday. Wasn't the spinach and ricotta one good?"
"Very good, very, very good," he said. "I couldn't stop eating it."
"Jacob's gonna devour these when he gets the appetite," Mom said. I turned back and took a step into the hallway. The distance between me and his room felt long and narrow like a high wire. When I got away from the casserole smell, I hit a different smell. It reminded me of old gym socks. Even with Mom's array of candles and incense, I still smelled it. It cut through everything. The last time I saw Jacob was on the drive home from his treatment. His face was a pale green and his eyes kept rolling back. Mom said I had to keep talking to him to keep his focus. I told him about my friends from school and how they keep pranking the teacher by putting tacks on her chair. It wasn't true. I saw it on a TV show once, but I was running out of material. It didn't matter though. Jacob didn't even respond. All he did was cough. Pink drool was spilling onto his shirt. "Danny," Mom said, "why don't you heat up some of those leftovers? We're all craving that spinach and ricotta casserole."
"I can't stop thinking about it," Dad said. "I was dreaming about it last night." I ignored them. I kept my focus on my brother's door. I didn't dream about the casserole like Dad. I kept having a different dream. My brother was running into my room and flicking my ear. It was a game we used to play. We would tiptoe up to the other's door, then wait for our moment. Then the attacker ran in and got 1 or 2 good flicks before retreating. In my dream though, Jacob would run in and flick me, but I wouldn't move. I just stood there. He would flick and laugh and then flick some more. Sometimes he would flick so hard my ear flew off. "Earth to Danny," Dad said, snapping his fingers in my face. He was standing in front of me, blocking my view of Jacob's door. "Do you mind heating up 4 portions of the casserole in case Jacob wants some? We're going to eat that before this next casserole because we want to make sure Jacob's able to try it because, in my opinion, it was definitely one of your mom's best." I looked up at him and held my eye contact. I couldn't say what I was thinking, so I wanted Dad to feel it. Maybe if I stared long enough, my feelings would translate. But Dad looked at me for only a moment, then away. In that brief connection, though, I saw something I didn't want to see. It was like staring down the tunnel of the world's deepest well. "Come on now," he said. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. His voice got heavier. "You're going to want to heat up each piece individually, because if you do them all at once, then you won't get the even heat through the pieces, and you'll probably have a couple that are too hot, and others that are too cold, and then Jacob won't get the full picture of how good these casseroles are."
Dad let go of my shoulders and walked ahead of me, but I stayed in the hallway a moment longer. I turned to look at my brother's door one last time. I fantasized about walking up to it and going inside, but I was afraid Mom would yell at me. Besides, I never liked going in there. He had a puke bucket next to his bed which always had pink splatters in it, and there were always clumps of his hair on his pillows. Back before the last hospital visit, Mom would make me go in there and talk to him, but I always made up some excuse, like I had a cold and didn't want to get him sick. When I couldn't get out of it, I would stay in there for a few minutes and watch him try to breathe. I would tell him about some TV episode I saw, then run back to my room. I looked up. I thought I was walking back to the kitchen, but I was moving toward the door. I didn't want to, but I kept moving, like my limbs were controlled by a puppeteer. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned. The gym sock smell filled my head like helium. Through the darkness, I could make out a sliver of my brother's face. The soft evening light fell on him. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. His arms were straight as rulers, and his fingers curled like a blooming rose. I walked to the side of his bed. Red spit fell off his lips. He looked like a frowning clown. I flicked his ear. It was hard. I walked out and closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I seemed to forget what the inside of his room looked like. With the door closed, it could be anything. Jacob could be doing jumping jacks or reading comic books or plotting his next ear flick attack. When I walked into the kitchen, I heated up 4 plates of spinach and ricotta casserole. When they were done, I wrapped Jacob's plate in aluminum foil and put it in the oven to keep warm. Then Mom, Dad, and I sat in the dining room and ate in silence.
Growing up with a sleepwalker in the family gets old pretty fast. At first, everyone is a bit concerned that they'll hurt themselves or wander out of the house. These fears aren't unwarranted. The sleepwalker isn't aware of their actions, and everyone else is usually, well, asleep. We only discovered my little brother was an apparent sleepwalker when we kept waking up to all of the doors and windows open in the morning. Since we live in a rural area, this wasn't too much of a danger beyond potential wild animals roaming in. Still, as the older sibling, my parents designated me as the official keeper of my brother's actions. We shared a room, you see, and they wanted to use that to my advantage when it came to retrieving and sending my brother back to bed. The common saying of "don't wake a sleepwalker" isn't as big a deal as you think. As long as you wake them gently and they're aware of their condition, they're not going to hurt themselves or be startled. Why would they be? They've just woken up after all. First, we tried bells on the door. When that failed to wake me up, my parents tried leaving plastic sheets on the floor. We tried just about everything you could possibly think of to try and alert me when he got up, and that was when my father came up with the idea of a string. Every night, my brother and I would tie a long string to our wrists and go to sleep like that. If he got up at any point, the tugging of him exiting the room woke me up pretty quickly. It was a harmless, noiseless, flawless plan that had me bringing my brother to bed long before he opened our home to the elements and animals outside. You get used to it. The string, the tugging, retrieving the sleepwalker, and putting them back to bed. Some nights he would get up more than once, and others he wouldn't sleepwalk at all. Either way, that was the only variance in an otherwise rigid routine we had. There was no spooky words out of his mouth during his sleep, no strange place he kept going back to, and no motive behind opening the doors and windows. When asked, my brother simply stated that his dream was unrelated and he didn't know why he would open the home. This went on for the better part of a year before finally dying down. We gradually stopped tying the strings to our arms before sleep because my brother stopped getting up. One night in late July, I remembered going to bed a bit earlier than usual after we took a trip down to the river for the day. Naturally, I was exhausted from an afternoon of paddling against the current and running around the nearby park with other kids my age. At some point during the night, I woke up, having become a very light sleeper thanks to my duty as watchful eye over my brother in the last year. I remembered feeling hot and sticky thanks to the humid weather, getting up and opening the window, flipping the fan on, and hoping that some air circulation might help. But when I turned to go back to bed, I saw my door was cracked open about 2 inches wide. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized there was something else as well, a face. Just beyond the threshold of the door, a small, pale face was pressed up to the crack, one big brown eye staring in at me lazily. My fear turned to frustration in an instant when I realized I was looking at my brother, who was standing completely still outside the door and more than likely sleepwalking again. With a deep breath, I gathered myself and grabbed the door handle. Go back to bed. Jesus Christ. Can't you just be normal for one night? And then I slammed the door shut and returned to bed. It was mean, but I was getting tired of it, you know? After a long day, I just wanted to sleep, and if he was just going to stand out there all night, then it wasn't my problem. The next morning was nothing special. Mom made breakfast, and as we sat down at the table, I noticed my brother wasn't up yet. That was weird. He was always an early riser and eager to greet the day. I'm guessing Joe is sleeping in today? I asked, idly picking and stabbing at my waffles. My dad set down his coffee and looked up from his paper, his brow crinkled in confusion. Joe went to stay at Andy's house last night, he said. Then slowly his face softened and he chuckled. You went to bed early, so you couldn't know. Suddenly, I wasn't very hungry. My stomach flipped and my throat felt tight. When did he go? Shortly after you went to bed, when we got back. I didn't tell my parents what I saw, worried that maybe something was now wrong with me. Instead, when my little brother came home later that day, I elected to reinstate the string system just as a precaution. Joe seemed confused, but was compliant, joking about how we're tied together forever. It was a strange comfort in a way. The string was reliable, predictable. And that was it. For the next few months, Joe and I both slept soundly with few sleepwalking incidents. I was thinking about dismissing the string again, but decided that just one more night wouldn't hurt either of us, just to make sure he wasn't getting up and wandering off. And it had become a source of a handful of inside jokes for us, sibling bonding time, that kind of stuff. I think we both almost slept better when it was on as well. I woke up to a harsh tug on my arm quite suddenly. It was pitch black besides my alarm clock nearby, which read the time at 2:25 a.m. That wasn't the usual time Joe got up if he did sleepwalk, but variations could happen, and with a sigh, I began to throw my covers off and slide out of the bed. That was when the second hard yank on the string nearly sent me tumbling to the floor, and I found my anger welling up pretty quickly. I thought he must have gotten the stupid string caught on something and was trying to pry himself loose, so I collected myself and hurried towards the door that was already open. That was when I noticed something was wrong. The string was only long enough to keep us maybe 5 feet apart at the most, but this string was longer and pulled taut down the hallway and around the corner. Joe? I called quietly. This didn't feel right at all, but I made my way down the hall and turned the corner just in time for a third tug on the string. It was leading into the kitchen, which featured a door to the basement that was now wide open as well. The string was descending into it and the tugging beyond it was growing more intense. Impatient. This wasn't like Joe at all. He'd never gone in the basement before, let alone manually pull on the string. Joe, are you awake? This isn't funny. I was louder this time, inching towards the open door as the string began to frantically vibrate and yank, and as if it was urging me further. The closer I got, the more excited it grew, and when I reached the doorway, the next tug was so harsh that I almost lost my balance again. Then there was a lull in the tugging when I heard a door opening behind me, the bathroom across the hall from my room. A bleary-eyed Joe stepped out and blinked, one hand rubbing his eye as he yawned. There was no string on his wrist. Suddenly, the string began to pull with a force stronger than before, making me stagger out onto the first step leading into the basement with a yell. Joe seemed to realize that I had the string on my wrist, and he didn't, and that whomever, or whatever, was in the basement was not him. There was a roar of noise, a low moaning from the darkness of the basement, and my little brother's frantic footfalls behind me as he ran his way over and grabbed my free arm to hold me while he scrambled for something to cut the string. I heard the kitchen drawers crashing open as he searched, and then he produced a knife, one shaky hand sawing at the string as the noise in the basement became so loud it seemed to reverberate through our bones. And then the tugging stopped. The string snapped away, and both Joe and I fell backwards onto our asses, sprawling over the kitchen floor. The noise ceased when the string was cut, and the basement door wobbled violently before slamming shut in our faces. Going to sleep after that was impossible, so Joe and I huddled up on my bed and sat with every possible light on in our room until the sun rose and our parents got up. Naturally, they didn't believe us, saying they hadn't heard a thing and slept soundly. They said that we must have hallucinated together or been sleepwalking even. Either way, I know that whatever was in the basement was not my brother, and I've refused to tie the string to my wrist ever again.